I called up Mark. He said, sure, Bri, come on over. I got 4 tickets. And do you think I gave those 2 extras to my friends? Nah. You're probably thinking I sold them on eBay for some astronomical amount, right? Thinking like a lawyer. Didn't do that either because that would have been disrespectful to Mark, to the team, to myself. I took those 2 tickets and I traded them to my cocaine dealer for $1,000 in cocaine.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Do I Know You, which is the only talk show in the entire world which celebrates identity just through the lens of siblings and children of celebrities. If we haven't yet met, my name is Jordy Ray, and I started this talk show because there was no space for it yet. My brother plays for the Golden State Warriors, and growing up, I realized that there was no playbook for this very unique lifestyle, and I just had to really take it on myself to figure out how to claim my own identity, not his, not anyone else's, and just celebrate who I am. And as I was talking to other people in this position, I realized, oh, there's something here, and it's a broader lesson for everyone. We all have to really get a good grip on who we are, not who other people say we are, not who we want to be and we're not, not who we know, not who we don't know, but who are you at your core? And that's what we're trying to figure out here today. Now, before I introduce this incredible guest, who I'm so honored that he's here, let this serve as a trigger warning. We are talking about very sensitive topics today, and I want to make sure that your heart and mind is protected as well. Here on Do I Know You, we embrace full identities, full stories, and everything that comes with that. And so I'm so excited to share or have him share his story today, but I do want to make sure that you are protected. So trigger warning for sensitive topics like eating disorders, suicidality, anxiety, depression, all those things. Now, today our guest has one of the most riveting, captivating, heart-wrenching stories I think we've ever had on this platform, and his name is Mark Cuban. Now, Brian's an attorney, an author, an activist, a speaker, and he really is so transparent about his story as it relates to eating disorders, drug addiction, drug rehabilitation, and just speaking out for those in this community. You probably know his last name. His brother is Mark Cuban, famous investor, if you know him from Shark Tank, owner of the Mavs. I mean, the list could go on and on and on. Actually, he's a Hoosier, and so me being a Hoosier, I feel connected in that way, but just an incredible family with a really, really powerful story. So without further ado, please welcome the amazing Mark Cuban. Brian, welcome to Do I Know You. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
It is my pleasure. Well, I'm so excited to have you on today. Thank you for just coming on and agreeing to be so vulnerable and share your story.
Sure.
Here on Do I Know You, we're all about exploring identity and what that looks like to each individual person. And so I want to start off with just a really big question, but I know you thought about it a lot. And that's, who is Mark Cuban? How would you describe yourself, to you?
Brian is someone who is, as the middle child, I'm someone who is very he wears my emotions on my sleeve. I'm the guy who cries at a note of music. I'm the guy who cries at a movie trailer. I'm the guy who sees a dead squirrel in the road and it ruins my week because I think about it and the dead squirrel's parents and this and that and did it suffer. I'm that kind of person, and I've always been that kind of person. I remember, I was a kid at camp who, and I was a heavy kid who was always trying to be as friendly as possible. I remember I'd always win the easiest person to get along with, kind of thing. And I'm somebody who really struggled as a child with bullying and weight, and some very traumatic incidents that influenced who I was and influenced my identity as well over the course of my life. But I did manage to, during all of that, go to college, get a law degree, and be a lawyer. And but all the bad things that surrounded the trauma really impacted how I lived those lives.
Absolutely. Well, all of that is stuff that I want to ask you about. So let's start with how you grew up. So you grew up in Pittsburgh, and you went to, also, why is it that everyone from Pennsylvania says PA? Is that just like the thing? I never hear anyone.
I never thought of that. I mean, we call ourselves Yinzers, Yinzers. We call ourselves Yinzers, but I can tell you I bleed black and gold. Steelers, long-suffering Pirates fan, so
love it.
Them. But even though I've lived in Dallas for decades, now Steelers always.
Love it. That's the home team.
But I don't know, but growing up, to give you some context, you have to remember this is during the baby boomer era, back when cell phones were two cups attached to a string, and back when going viral meant 15 kids passed a note in the lunchroom, right? And so Mark is the oldest. My older brother Mark, who people may know, Shark Tank, and that's and all that, the Mavs. He was the firstborn, and he was always entrepreneurial, outgoing, selling this door to door, selling that door to door as a kid. I remember our local newspapers shut down during a strike, and he and his buddies drove to Cleveland, about 200 miles from Pittsburgh. And they bought the Cleveland Plain Dealer, their newspaper. They drove them back to Pittsburgh and sold them on a street corner during rush hour for twice what they paid for them. So you kind of knew what he was going to be. And I remember he was 16 years old, and some guy gave him $5,000, a family friend, to go buy stamps. He used to buy and trade stamps at a convention in New York City. So my dad had to fly with him or drive with him to New York City to do this. But so he was wheeling and dealing at 15, 16 years old. So my younger brother Jeff was a nationally ranked wrestler. Went to school, went to junior college on a wrestling scholarship. Good-looking kid. The jock, beer parties, dates, the prom, all of those things. I was classic middle child syndrome. I was shy. I was withdrawn, and I internalized anything that was negative said about me, like, and wore it as who I was, kind of like a skin tight suit. And I was a heavy kid trending on obese. And I was bullied severely at school over my weight. And unfortunately, also, I had a very difficult relationship with my mother. And again, this is how I experienced her. I don't talk about how Mark or my younger brother experienced her. There was a lot of fat shaming in my household. I used to come home from school and I'd open the cupboard and pull out the cans of Chef Boyardee ravioli or beefaroni or SpaghettiOs. I loved them. Just loved them. And this was back when, we didn't, before electric can openers, you open it, and I'd stick the spoon in. We didn't have a microwave, and shovel it in. And my mom sold real estate. And she'd come home from selling real estate for lunch, see me in the kitchen, and not all the time, but it happened, and it was traumatic. She'd say, Brian, if you keep eating that way, you're going to be a fat pig. Now, this was what my grandmother said to my mom, and this were the things I suspect my great grandmother said to my grandmother. Fat shaming is often runs generationally downward in families. And I came from I'm Jewish, and I came from an Eastern European Jewish family where there was this Jewish grandmother, eat, 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 right? And my mom also had a verbally and mentally abusive relationship with her mother, who, according to my mom, was a diagnosed schizophrenic. And my mother was struggling with her own mental health issues at the time. And at a time where women couldn't talk about these things, right? If you talked about needing, psychiatric help or this or that, and you could risk losing your children. And so it was just kind of contagious under the floorboards where no one ever talked about it. But, as a child, you experience it, right? And not understand it when your mother is struggling. And my mother struggled. But not understanding these things, I grew depressed, and I began to eat more Chef Boyardee and more Chef Boyardee. And I became a bigger Brian and a bigger Brian. And the bullying, again, at school was brutal. And this was brick and mortar bullying. This was in your face bullying way before the internet. And it all culminated one day when I call the day of the gold pants. I don't know how many of your listeners will remember, but back in the 70s, mid 70s, there was what is known as the disco phase, the disco craze, a dance. And there was a movie called Saturday Night Fever that kind of personified the disco phrase with John Travolta. And Mark, believe it or not, taught disco. He taught it at some club in downtown Pittsburgh, and he would come home with his bell-bottom pants, right, and platform shoes that were 3 inches high, made him 3 inches taller. And one day he walked into my room. My door was shut. I isolated tremendously as a child because of the bullying and such things. I was always in my bedroom with my door shut. And he knocked, and he was holding this pair of shiny gold bell-bottom pants, disco pants. And he said, "Would you like these?" And I said, "Sure." And I took them. But Mark wasn't a big guy. They fit him fine. I had to jump up and down, spray the water bottle. My butt looked like 15 cats trying to get out as I shoehorned into those pants. But I got in, and I wore them to school more than once. As you might imagine, the kids made fun of me. My gut hanging out over them, tight around the waistline. But in my mind, the kids who were making fun of me were, again, the people I wanted to be with. The prom king, the prom queen, the kids who are getting their first date, the kids who are experiencing their first kiss, walking between the high school lockers holding hands, going to the football game after school, the McDonald's or wherever, the house party that I wanted to be included in, but didn't think fat pigs were entitled to. So I kind of hung around on the outside of the groups, right, hoping it would be kind of like a fraternity hazing, where they say, okay, you're one of us now. And my nickname was Cubes. You're one of us now, Cubes. But that's not how bullying works, is it? I'm walking home from school with these kids one day. It was a mile walk from the high school to the house along this sidewalk on a busy street. And I'm wearing my shiny gold bell bottom disco pants and my stomach's hanging over. The kids are making fun of me, poking at me. And then one of them suddenly grabs at the zipper at the very top and pulls. And it rips just a little bit under the belt loop. And the next thing I know, another kid goes, ooh, and he pulls and he rips it right along the zipper down to the crotch. And these kids were on me like a pack of wild dogs. They physically assaulted me. They ripped off my pants, my shiny gold bell bottom disco pants that Mark had given me, and they threw the shreds into the street down to my Fruit of the Loom tighty whities. And I remember I was wearing a Pittsburgh Pirates t-shirt. And they they went down the sidewalk, high five and looking back, yeah, Cubes, like they had done the funniest, greatest thing ever, right? In the history of pantsing. I had to wait for traffic to clear. I went out and picked up the shreds. I covered up my tighty whities and waddled home like a penguin. And that walk of shame was a mile, but it might as well have been from Boston to Seattle because it felt like it took that long to get home. And the worst part of it, the absolute worst part of it, were the stoplights. There were two stoplights, and every stoplight seemed to take an hour as people looked at me, eyes, wide, but no one rolled down their window and asked if I was okay. I finally got home. The house was empty. I walked down to our basement, and I walked down to I remember it was these painted blue stairs, and the stairs creaked with each step. And I had never really paid attention to the creak before, but every creak at that moment sounded like someone fired a gun into a pond. And then the ripples from the bullet ripple out. And they rippled out to my father, who ran what is known as a trim shop. He reupholstered car seats maybe a mile and a half away. To my brothers, say, dude, you can't stand up to bullies. And of course, they wouldn't have said that, Mark and Jeff. They just said, who are these guys? Let's go. And, to my mother, who'd say, I told you so. She wouldn't have said that. She loved me dearly. But in the mind of a, 13, 14-year-old boy, this was all so real. This was all so real to me. And I found a wastebasket and I pushed away the Chef Boyardee cans and the newspapers, whatever else was in there. And I put those shreds at the bottom and was hoping it would bury my shame, bury my trauma. But that's not how shame and trauma works, is it? Shame and trauma have a way of threading through our lives. Even when we've compartmentalized it and say to ourselves, I'm over that, I'm over that, that was this many years ago, and have a way of coming out when we least expect it in very destructive ways, often self-destructive ways, and we may not even know what was driving it. So that kind of personified my life as a teenager back then. I didn't tell Mark, I didn't tell my younger brother, I didn't tell my parents, because I was just so ashamed, right? And I carried that shame with me for decades.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing, number one. It's so interesting to me hearing you retell this story. It's like I'm there and it's so vivid. It's so clear. It feels like you can almost go back and see it, When you think about how that tied to, your journey after that moment and growing up, was that always something where you could look back and be like, "Oh, that was a core memory," or did
Uh,
it take some uncovering?
it took a lot of therapy and a lot of uncovering.
Mm,
Uh, I mean, a lot, because it was really quite a while before. Because you have to remember, I was in the middle of this tornado for decades, and when you're in the middle, you have to be able to get outside the tornado, right?
right. Right.
To be able to really have some inner reflection on who you really are, as we talk about identity. And but that traumatic moment. And again, there's a difference between cause and correlation, right? There were many other things that went on in my life, and I want to make it clear that I do not blame my mother for the things I went through. Cause and correlation. Two people can go through the exact same thing and have two different paths. So, I don't want people to think I blame my mother. And I'm also not trying to delegitimize anyone who does,
Yeah.
went through bad things. This is just my
Yes.
journey.
Right.
And so, yeah, that had a very, kind of titanium core impact on my identity going forward. And as you're watching the brothers, how they're with their identities, you know, one goes this way, one goes that way. That does have an impact. That's not their fault either, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as I watch, and we'll get into that, and how that really, I wish I would have told them. I wish I would have told them what happened.
Do you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they're the only people who in my lives, certainly at that time, who, including my mother and father, but my brothers, right, my two brothers, and I should have told them because
Well,
they would have
that
been
was
there for me.
yeah, and that was a question I had for you is, you talk about isolation and shame, and it seems like, I mean, I can speak in my own life, things that when I isolate, it is rooted in like I feel like disgusting. I don't want people to, come in, right? And so as a
Yeah,
child, I mean, I think people might be listening and be like, "Oh, well, he had his brothers. He could have." And it's like, no, it doesn't work that way. When you're in the tornado, you're just
it
trying to,
doesn't. It doesn't. And
yeah,
you also have to, there's also more context. I mean, Mark, Jeff, and I were stair stepped, right? Mark was born. Mark, I forget how old Mark is, but he's about close to 3 years older than me, and I'm close to 3 years older than Jeff. So it's just enough that we all had our own, they had their own groups of friends. It's not like we were all hanging out in the
right,
same social groups, in the same peer groups. So
right.
Mark was doing this, Jeff was doing this. And so that makes it even a little tougher.
Absolutely. That's a great point. So, okay, let's keep going. So, you talk about this tornado. Now it's starting to really continue to swirl, right? And you're
Yeah.
starting to go into college. Let's talk about that.
So I went to Penn State University. And I was so happy. I thought it was going to be, a whole new Brian. I'd make friends, maybe get a girlfriend, and I really tried to, again, compartmentalize what happened in high school. Yeah, the ironic thing was, and growing up in Pittsburgh, a lot of kids go to Penn State, so I went up there, and they were the boys. A lot of them were the
Fair.
same kids. But so my father drives me up to Penn State, and I remember it was this. I'm in my dorm that I'm going to share with three other kids, and I remember it was this beautiful fall day, and we're unpacking, and I'm looking out this window out into the parking lot, this long rectangular window, and kids are unpacking, they're talking, their parents have the trunks open, leaves are falling, it is cool and crisp in central Pennsylvania, a little breeze, and I make eye contact with this curly brown haired girl. And I think she's smiling at me. And I start sweating. I literally start profusely sweating like it was 80 degrees suddenly. And thinking, okay, within 5 seconds, we're going to get married, we're going to date, we're going to get married, and we're going to have 2 and 1/2 children, right? A girl likes me, someone likes me. And within a sickening thud of a millisecond, I realized it was a smirk. She turns to her friends, turns back to me, cups her hands over her mouth, and shouts, ugly, ugly. Now, I'm not the first kid to have a nasty thing said to him. Another kid may have shouted ugly back. Another kid may have flipped her off, given her the elbow salute. Another kid may have not said anything. And I don't blame her either, right? But in that moment, you know what I thought to myself? She's right.
Hmm.
I'm ugly. I'm a fat pig. That is what I've been told, in my young 17 going on 18 years, my entire life. So she's right. I'm not going to gig her for speaking her truth. So what can I do to not be ugly? And that's when I started thinking about it. What can I do to not be ugly? What do I have control over? I'm 17 years old. What does a 17-year-old have in his toolbox to not be ugly? Food.
Hmm.
That's it. So I decided that my path to winning her affection, to my mother's love, although she did love me, to the respect of the bullies, was to lose weight. And I began to starve myself. And as a going on 18-year-old boy, uh, at a time when no one was talking about it at all, I developed an eating disorder.
Hmm.
And I transitioned into binging and purging. And I'll bet there are a lot of your listeners who have never heard a guy talking about having an eating disorder. right? But about a third of all those with eating disorders are male. And it's such a stigmatizing thing for men, for males, and that only 1 in 10 will seek treatment.
Wow.
So it is very shameful. It is very
Mm.
shameful, and
Wow.
that goes across, that goes across ethnic demographics and all, and all kind, gender demographics and all kinds of things,
Yeah.
and on how people, males, experience eating disorders.
I wanted to call out the fact that for many listeners, I mean, you're absolutely right. It is something that people don't talk about. And why do you think that is so stigmatized for men?
Because it is stereotyped as a female disorder. Back in 1983, there was a wonderful singer by the name of Karen Carpenter. She was a drummer for the Carpenters, beautiful singer, and she died from complications related to anorexia. And that kind of brought eating disorders into the pre digital national spotlight.
Mm.
But it also kind of cemented the stereotype that it's a female disorder. And
Mm.
again, this is before the internet, so you didn't go to the newspaper and see guys talking about eating disorders. There were
Yeah.
no groups of guys talking about eating disorders. You suffered in silence.
Mm.
And this stigma is brutal even today for men,
Wow.
for
Yeah,
men. But
absolutely.
I was binging and purging. And for those of your listeners who don't know what that is when you eat a lot of food and then regurgitate it through throwing up. And I felt that every time I did that, it's weird. It was almost like when I became addicted to cocaine. There was kind of a peace that swept into me every time I binged and purged. That the next day everything was going to be okay. The next day that girl would like me. This and that. But then there was this overwhelming shame, all encompassing, drenching body shame of engaging in an act that I didn't understand, didn't have a name for, but knew I had to do again and again and again. The life of a guy or a female with an eating disorder. And there are many different eating disorders. There's bulimia. There's many different types of bulimia, anorexia, binge eating disorder. So yeah, believe it or
Wow.
not, I'm in recovery from an eating disorder.
Wow. Congratulations. I mean, honestly, I think that you highlighting it's that moment, right? It's
Yeah,
the few seconds or minutes, or I don't want to put words in your mouth, of kind of like you can tune the world out and just be present, but then the moments after being
yeah.
like
And
devastating.
And you'll see, and I see it online, people stereotype it also as kind of a white privilege kind of thing. It is not. It cuts across
Mm.
all demographics. Eating
Yeah.
disorders cut across all demographics.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and I see that a lot. I see that a lot. And,
Interesting. I've
kind of
never
like,
seen that. That's really
yeah, the
why are they
suburban,
saying that?
the suburban high school cheerleader type, stereotype. And
Uh,
it's just not.
yeah, no, it's certainly
It's
not
not.
the case.
But it didn't make me feel any better because I'm looking in the mirror, I'm looking at my reflection, and no matter and I got thin, and I still saw the fat pig, almost like an overpowering visual delusion, right?
Mm.
And I began to drink, so I didn't have to feel it all. Before I knew it, going into my sophomore year at Penn State, I was an alcoholic. I was drinking at night alone. I was at Penn State. I would go to the liquor store, buy a little bottle of tequila, and swig it in the alley where the bars were to get drunk, so I could go into the not go into the bar and get drunker, hoping I'd be a different Brian, wouldn't be that fat pig. Never worked
Mm.
out that way. And going to class hungover, going to class still half drunk, and so I went through Penn State as an alcoholic.
Wow. And at this time, who was around you? What
No,
community did you have?
I was isolating, and this was at a time when, unless someone who was in 12 step, and the most well known of 12 steps is Alcoholics Anonymous, but there are others. Unless someone was already in some kind of self help group, right, mutual aid group, and reached out to you, you were either you're white knuckling it, or might have been in a hospital ward if your
Mm.
parents pulled you out and saw it. But there was really residential treatment that we see today, right? It wasn't really a thing back then. So
Yeah.
no one, and I was still isolating. I had very few friends at Penn State. Wasn't going to the Penn State games or anything like that. I really had no friends, and it was. I look back at Penn State as 4 miserable years.
Wow. Because of that.
Yeah, and I did. Mark went off to Indiana. Mark was at Indiana. Again, he was by the time I was at finishing Penn State, he was already in Dallas,
Mm.
and Jeff went to his school. So we were, during this time, we stayed in touch, obviously, but there was no texting or stuff. You had to call, right?
Yeah.
And And so, but they went their ways too in their lives. And, I felt very alone. I felt very
Yeah.
alone during those 4 years.
When you look back at that time in your life, what would you say to you at that time?
I would say, you are loved. Your brothers love you, your mother loved you. You are loved, you know, and this is a moment. This is one moment,
Mm,
and I would tell myself that what you see as now a 21-year-old young man, what you are hearing, those voices you're hearing in your head are not real, right?
mm,
These kids you look at and you think they're thinking you're a fat pig. No, so you tell yourself all these nasty things so you don't have to integrate yourself and into society, right? Into college life, and those are just voices in your head. They are not real. Not even today. The vast majority of our thoughts are not grounded in reality as adults, and you are loved, and it's okay to love yourself. That's what I would, fat,
yeah,
thin, and these are not real thoughts.
that's beautiful.
So that doesn't make it any easier, right?
Absolutely.
Because tip of the tongue. I call it tip of the tongue syndrome with teenagers. You want to ask, "Will you go out with me? Can I join you?" It's at the tip of your tongue, but then the voices come in, right?
Mm.
So it's easier to tell yourself they're going to ridicule me and go back to your room.
My mom always talks about she didn't make this up, but the fear like false evidence appearing real, like how
Yeah.
it's all in our minds. But to your point, hindsight's 2020, right? I mean, when you're in the thick of it, it's easier to say and look back, but that's just not
Well,
how we think at the time.
and also when you're 21 or 22, your toolbox of life experiences is pretty empty, right? So you
Absolutely.
you don't have a lot of context to tell, to really be able to even for a second step outside of that.
Yeah, definitely. And, my therapist and I always talk about naming things. Like assigning language to your experiences is so powerful. And you wouldn't, I personally didn't think that, but she's like, I'll describe emotions. And she's like, no, let's call out what that is. And like you said, you didn't have the vocabulary for that at the time. You
I
didn't
did.
have the eating
You have
disorder.
very limited life experiences. And then let's look at my life experiences at 21. Physically assaulted, bullied, difficult relationship at home, right? Yeah,
Mm,
and an eating disorder. That's all I had.
yeah.
And that became very important to me, those things. And I also developed what is known as exercise bulimia. I turned into a long distance runner. And because I could do it alone and I could do something where I can say, I'm doing this, I own this, I'm good at this. And I do it alone and I don't have to worry about anyone ridiculing me. And what this eating disorder is obsessive compulsive exercise for the primary purpose of offsetting calories. And so if you were to ask me today what my biggest challenge is, I would say my relationship with exercise and food, right? So it's something that I still have to work with today.
Yeah.
And so I would do that. I would go out and run 10 miles a day, 20 miles a day. So I didn't have to, face anyone.
Wow.
And these were the only things I had in my 4 years and I own them. Right. And to go out into the real world on graduation means I would have to let someone take those away. I would have to give those up. And that was
Mm,
terrifying to me. And so at Penn State, I wanted to be a cop. I was a criminal justice major. I mean, that would have worked out real well. I'd have been the first guy in the evidence room trading out the blow for the baby laxative. What was interesting is that I was sitting, back. This was back before the internet, so to get a police officer job, these communities, whether it's Dallas or wherever, they send out these notices of jobs available to all the colleges that had criminal justice programs. So I'm
mm,
sitting in the office looking through jobs, and there are two kids next to me, and they're talking about taking the test to get into law school. And they're from Pittsburgh, and they're talking about going to the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. So I close the book, and I'm listening to them, and everything suddenly made sense to me. Everything.
mm,
Not that I wanted to be a lawyer, but that law school was 3 years. And if I went to law school, I would have 3 more years where I could drink, I could not have to deal with my eating disorder, I could run, and I could engage in the exact same behaviors that allowed me to survive at Penn State.
mm.
Because these behaviors, as destructive as they were, though I didn't see it that way, were things that allowed me to just move forward, even if it was only at the tip of my nose, right? And even if I wasn't really living, I was just surviving. That was fine. That's what I
Yeah.
wanted, to just survive. So that's the only reason I went to law school. The only reason.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Strange.
Okay.
Sounds strange, but it made sense to me at the time.
And and that's valid. So you mentioned cocaine. Is
Mhm.
law school where that came in?
No, I survived 3 years at Pitt Law as an alcoholic. Did poorly, as you might imagine, because you have to study in law school, right? You can't. It's not like college where you can pull an all nighter. At least back
Right.
then,
It's real
you have to
life.
study. So I graduated by the skin of my teeth,
Mm.
and I decided I was going to move from Pittsburgh to Dallas, Texas, because Mark and Jeff had both my brothers had moved there, and so I reached out to them. Mark said, "Sure, come and you'll move in with me." So I took a Greyhound bus to Dallas. Mark met me at the bus station. I moved in with him, and they didn't do drugs, but they're out drinking, going into clubs, having a good time. So I fit right in. My dating and drinking escalated. Then it was the summer of 1987 where, for the first time in my life, I discovered the one thing. Now 26 years old, I discovered the one thing in the bathroom of a nightclub in downtown Texas that finally allowed me to look in the mirror and said, "You're a cool dude. Yeah,
Mm.
you're a Mac. Yeah, you're gonna go upstairs. All those girls are gonna love you." I discovered cocaine. Some guy give me a sample line of cocaine, try this, and I did it. And for the first time in my life, I looked in the mirror and loved myself. The very first time.
Wow.
And I went upstairs and going, yeah, baby, And but then the line wore off, and then Brian became Brian again, who's just ashamed, and so but I had to love myself again. Where's that dealer? So I gave him $100 for my last. I gave him my last $100 for a gram of blow. Went back down, and Brian loved Brian again, and again, and again, and again, and that's how I discovered cocaine. And what was interesting? As I did that first line off this nasty toilet in the summer of 1987, I remember as I inhaled, the basketball player for Maryland, Lenny Bias, had just died. He
Mm.
was his first round draft pick going to the NBA, and he died from trying cocaine for the first time, and he had a heart reaction. And I remember thinking about this, and this was huge news at the time, huge news. And it actually, Lenny Bias, it brought a lot of awareness to what was going on with the quote unquote crack epidemic and things like that. As stigmatizing and as awful as that was, throwing people in jail. But I remember thinking, I hope that didn't happen to me. And I
Wow.
inhaled, and it didn't. And I very quickly became psychologically dependent on that artificial feeling of loving myself. And
Mm.
that's how I became addicted to cocaine, and alcohol and cocaine took over my life. I lost my career as a lawyer. And do we have time for a really interesting story about how crazy my life had gotten with
I would
cocaine?
love it. Yes.
So, in June of 2006, the Mavericks, of Dallas Mavericks, who my brother owned at the time, were going to the NBA championship for the first time, playing the Miami Heat, right? And so we were all excited. We had been to the playoffs, but this was our first trip to the big show. And as you might imagine, I was going to get some pretty good seats for those games.
Oh, yes.
You know, nepotism, okay for that, right? And so I also had the opportunity to get tickets for friends, a couple tickets. I called up Mark. He said, "Sure, Bri, come on over." I got 4 tickets. And do you think I gave those 2 extras to my friends? Nah. You're probably thinking I sold them on eBay for some astronomical amount, right? Thinking like a lawyer. Didn't do that either, because that would have been disrespectful to Mark, to the team, to myself. I took those 2 tickets and I traded them to my cocaine dealer for $1,000 in cocaine. Selling them
Wow.
on eBay was disrespectful, but trading them to my blow dealer, perfectly acceptable. So my dealer shows up at my house. I was high class. He delivered. Uh, he gives me this giant Ziploc baggie of blow. I go running up to my home. Yeah, I give him the tickets, go running up to my home office, dumping it out on the desk, looking at it like I'm Scarface. I wanted to go rub my nose in it. I line it out. I roll up a dollar bill, and cocaine users were an ironic bunch, especially right coming out of a pandemic. You'll wash your hand, use the Purell, but we'll stick a dollar bill up our nose that has God knows what on it and has been used by God knows who. Go figure. But cocaine had long stopped giving me, by that point, this is now 2006, cocaine had long stopped being fun. And it was no longer, as Rick James said, a hell of a drug.
Mm.
You remember that phrase. It was
Yeah.
just pain and shame and chasing that first incredible high from 1987, right? That was never going to come again. And there was also the paranoia. I had become very paranoid. And I thought I heard sirens outside. I thought I heard doors slam. So I go peeking out my window, and there's no one out there. But now I'm awash in paranoia. I hide the cocaine. I drive to a home improvement store where I buy electrical faceplate outlets, a drill, and a saw. I go back home and I go to the drywall in my upstairs closets and cut and drill fake electrical outlets in the drywall. I put the cocaine in smaller Ziploc baggies and I put it behind all these fake electrical outlets and seal it up so they look like you could plug something in, but you can't, thinking I'm the smartest lawyer ever. But it's not like the DEA, the cops, and the drug dogs have never thought of that one before. And I line out a couple more rails, and again, it's just pain and shame. And about an hour and a half later, I'm all paranoid that I'm going to get busted. So I go to those same electrical outlets, I take it all back out, and I flush it down the toilet, that same night. The next morning comes, I wake up and I'm thinking to myself, you're an idiot. You flushed your stash down the toilet and there's another game coming up. I call Mark. I get 4 more tickets, right? 2 for friends. I call my dealer. He comes over to my house. He says, dude, you did all that last night? I didn't want to tell him I flushed it down the toilet like a moron. I said, yes, give me more. Okay. Back up to my home office, rinse, wash, repeat. I line out, again, just pain and shame. And it was never, Brian, you have a problem. It was, Brian, maybe you need a new dealer with better crap. And Brian, or maybe you need to change out, the type of alcohol you're drinking, switch out the Grey Goose for the Jack Daniels or whatever. And it was, and then again, the paranoia. I hide it again. And this time I lasted about 2.5 hours later in the night before I went back to those same electrical outlets, put it all back in the same bag, went to that same toilet, and for the second night in a row, flushed it down the toilet again.
Wow.
The insanity of addiction, doing the same thing over and over, expecting it the same way, expecting a different result. I flushed close to $2,000 worth of blow down the toilet over a course of 2 nights. And it wasn't because I thought I had a problem. It was because I was paranoid.
Wow.
And
Wow.
what was really interesting? I didn't tell that story for a while because I didn't want to be an embarrassment to Mark or the team. And when I finally told the story publicly, the Dallas Morning News ran a front page sports story on it. Mark Cuban, and it's like, oh, thanks for the press, right? I got a couple books out. Thanks for the press. It's not like this is big news to the people around me.
Right.
And that's
Wow.
and that's something, and we can talk about, because this is about siblings. That's something you always have to be careful about, and I'm always careful about now because I've made mistakes, right? So you have to think 3 steps out. How is this going to impact my family? What I say, what I do, and especially I've learned around the NBA. I'm not on Twitter so much anymore with the way it's become, but I remember I tweeted something, and I'll tell you what it was. It was back in the days of with cell phones where you had a lot of these dead zones, right? And I had AT&T, and Luke Wilson, the actor, was running this commercial about no drop calls while you surf the internet. And so I tweet something, and he said, well, not really true. I have 15 drop calls and can't surf the internet. The next thing I know, Mark emails me because I had forgotten we have AT&T Plaza at the American Airlines Center. And he was irate, and so I deleted that. So, and there was another one where I remember when we were trying to recruit DeAndre Jordan to the center. This was back right after the lockout or whatever. And so there was all this Twitter drama about, and then I forget the sportscaster's name, the sports journalist's name. And he said Mark Cuban is frantically driving around Houston trying to get in contact with, DeAndre Jordan. And I generally don't get involved in that stuff because Mark's a big boy. But when someone tries to make my family sound unstable, mentally unstable, when I thought that's what this is trying to do, sometimes my emotions get the best of me. And I said, and I tweeted like it was STFU. And that's, I said, you don't know what you're talking about, STFU. And he retweeted it and it went viral. And, this time Mark was more understanding. He reached out and said, stay out of this, right? But, when it all came back, I was right. Mark was in Dallas. He wasn't in Houston.
Right.
And Mark went at the guy saying, you don't know what you're talking about. So in essence, I was right.
Right. Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
you have to learn that, and I've had to learn, I'm sure you understand this, that anything you tweet, it can get picked up by some obscure blog or anything you post or anything you say, and suddenly it's viral. And once it's viral, the message, you don't know how that message is going to go.
It's gone.
Yeah,
Completely out of your control.
out of your
It's a
control.
tough
So
lesson.
I have learned that lesson a couple times.
Well, I mean, there's no playbook, right? And so that's something I wanted to ask you is, sometimes we have guests on Do I Know You where since they were born, their parents been the spotlight, right? So they grew
Yeah.
up in this. You and I are in a different position, right? Where life started one way and then, rise to fame and now it's different. So at what point in your journey was Mark coming to fame and how did that kind of
That
influence everything?
well, it all started in really all started in 19 I want to say 99 when he sold broadcast.com to Yahoo, right, and
Okay.
became a quote unquote paper billion. It became a billionaire on paper, and then
Mm-hmm.
and then the cash billionaire. At that time, I was struggling big time, right? I was struggling big time, going through multiple failed marriages as a result of drugs and alcohol. But the real issue, the real thing became in 2000 and I think either 2000, yeah, it was 2000 when he bought the Mavs. And I remember we were both working out at the same club, gym, and I was in the locker room and I was struggling and I had lost all my clients, because of and I really hadn't, I'd kind of distanced from my family and stuff. And he asked how things were going. I said, terrible, and this and that. And he said, well, I'm going to buy, don't tell anyone. You can't tweet this. I remember he said, you can't tweet this. Yeah. And he said, I'm buying the Maverick that's going to be announced just after the first of the year. You'll come work for me. And that was in 2000. So that was announced, and I went to work for Mark. And it was a disaster, not Mark's fault, from my fault, because here's what happened. I was somebody who was struggling with drugs and alcohol. I was someone who had no identity. I was empty, completely empty, emotionally, from a self respect standpoint. I had no respect for myself, and so it became very easy. And I call this name fame. It became very easy to become. Oh, look at Mark. He's nationally known. This going on. I can become just be Mark's brother. I don't have to be Brian Cuban. I can be Mark's brother, and I can date girls half my age, get free drugs. I can go into walk into bars in Dallas. Just the line. I can do all these things that really have nothing to do with me, right? But that will fill me up with this fake feeling of respect, and none of it is real.
Mm.
None of it is real, but I didn't know what real was. I didn't know how to have my own identity. So I became that. And I lived that life. And frankly, I became the biggest obnoxious douchebag on the Dallas, nightclub circuit and party circuit. But as long as I could live that life and have this artificial, you know, feeling of respect, and
Mm.
nobody respected me, right? This is all Mark's thing, and he earned it.
Mm.
And so that's what happened to me. And again, that's my fault. I created these fake business cards, Mark Cuban Enterprises, I handed them out, and it was just ridiculous. And every now and again, Mark would have to tamp me down and say, Brian, you can't go out there and act like this, right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I and what I did was just distance myself from my family so I could go out and act like that.
Right. I mean,
Uh,
and in fairness to you, right, there's no playbook. And that's something that I keep trying to like harp on in this show is like looking back, things seem like, oh, well, that was dumb of me to do that, or like that was stupid. But it's just like there's no guide. And especially when you don't have community who can like tell you and like, just like how our brothers didn't have a playbook for rising to fame, family doesn't have a playbook either, right? So I'm
yeah,
curious because you are doing amazing things now, and I really want to make sure we highlight your new book. But what was the like turning point for you, right?
that
Was
was
it
Easter
was it one
weekend.
moment or was it
No,
progressive?
that was Easter weekend 2007. And
Mm.
that was after a near suicide attempt in 2005 where Mark and Jeff saved my life. Uh,
Wow.
they got an email, a disturbing email from a friend, and I decided to end my life by suicide because I saw no hope. And they took me of my first of trip to two psychiatric facilities, but that didn't take. And I began dating someone who didn't know anything about my issues, and I had really just distanced myself from my family. And it would be disingenuous not to talk about extreme privilege, right? I have lived in extreme privilege, both financially, and multiple levels of privilege we could go through, and a lot of that people don't have. last name privilege. So I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand that. But Mark had to pull me out of working for him and was basically just giving me a paycheck for doing nothing. So I didn't end up under a bridge because could no longer practice law. And so it was Easter weekend 2007. I was dating someone. She moved in with me, didn't know about any of my issues. Well, how could she not know? I was the greatest liar ever, the greatest liar in the world. She went away for the weekend, and I'm thinking, okay, it was a buddy's bachelor party. I'm going to go out. It was a nightclub in downtown Dallas. I'm going to go out. She'll be back Sunday evening. I'll be showered, shaved. She'll never know, right, that I was out partying. And next thing I know, it's 2 days later. She's looking down at me. It's Sunday, like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. She's looking down at me. There's cocaine spread all over the place. There's alcohol. There's Xanax pills. I was abusing black market Xanax. I had a 2 day blackout, almost 2 day blackout. And she's trying to figure out, I think, if she walked in the right house. I'm trying to figure out what lie I can tell to explain this Law and Order episode orgy of evidence that I might not be the person I represented myself to be. And all I could kind of think of was a metaphorical running home to mama. Take me back to, and I named the psychiatric facility. And she didn't know I'd been the first time. So we're standing in the parking lot of that psychiatric facility, and I'm thinking, okay, I had three thoughts. One, there won't be a third trip back. I'll be dead. Two, she's going to leave me. I'd leave. She moved out, but she actually stood by me, and we dated for over a decade while I rebuilt and found recovery and rebuilt the broken trust. And now we've been married going on 8 years and together almost 19. So we were able to
Wow.
survive it. Not all relationships will survive that, but we were able to. And
Oh.
one more thing in that parking lot. I thought about my father. I thought about my father, who was the greatest generation, uh, a Navy CB, fought in the Battle of Okinawa, fought in Korea. He was the middle of three boys like me. And he used to say to Mark, Jeff, and I all the time, guys, wherever you go, whether it's across the state, across the country, across the world, you pick up that phone and you see if your brother's okay. You tell your brother you love him. This was the relationship my father had with his two brothers. And he was passing down this gift of love of family, which is also a privilege because I work with people struggling with addiction. A lot of them are estranged and broken families, unable to survive it. But he was passing down this gift. And in that parking lot, I thought, I don't want to disrespect and lose that gift. I didn't want to lose my family. Why then and not 2005 when I was going to end my life? I don't know. But I decided that I did not want to lose my brothers, lose my father, and I wouldn't lose their love, but family's distance, right? Who would want some coked out brother hanging around your nieces and nephews? And that had happened. And my father knew nothing about these things. I hid this from my father. And so it was at that moment I decided I was ready.
Wow.
That was the turning point. And I've been in recovery ever since. And my relationship with Mark and Jeff is tight. We all have our own lives, but I saw we all went to the NBA playoffs together, and we are texting, Instagramming, and doing that all the time,
Yeah.
right? Mark, as you might imagine, is busy doing this and that. But yeah, we all flew to the NBA. When we played the Celtics, didn't go the way we wanted. We all went to every game together, and we do those things. We'll take trips,
Wow.
and we'll go. We're talking about going to Vegas together, but we are as close as ever. And you want to know how what my father said stuck? All these decades later, 1,200 miles from Pittsburgh, Mark, Jeff, and I live walking distance to each other. That's not an accident. And my
Wow.
father, until he died in 2018, lived across the street from me. That wasn't an accident.
Wow. Even
And
today, you're in walking distance.
yes, from Mark and Jeff. Jeff, yeah, Jeff. I mean, literally, I could walk to either one of those, and it's not a long walk.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, congratulations. I mean,
Like,
on everything. One, thank you for sharing your story because I also think when we hear about drugs or addiction or suicidality, all these things, people feel like there's some distance between them and those topics. But I think what your story reveals is there's no subset of the population. There's no, like, it could really happen to
It
anyone.
can happen to anyone. Now, I always say this: addiction does not discriminate based on who it can happen to, but it does discriminate. The recovery options discriminate based on privilege, right? Very few people have the privilege that I've enjoyed in terms of, the options because of my family, because I have a billionaire brother who loves me dearly, and things like that. I have health insurance privilege and all these different things. So I get that. I don't want people to think I discount that, but it is what it is. That's how I grew up. That's how
Yeah.
I've lived, right?
Yeah.
My father was a working class guy, which is even privilege within that sphere that he was able to support us with a middle class job.
Yeah.
But I don't want any of your listeners to think that I dismiss that. I do not.
Yeah,
But I wasn't
absolutely
willing
not.
to take advantage of those options for a long time, and I almost died before I did. But I do recognize that.
Yes, absolutely. And something that I hear or see on Instagram a lot is how recovery is not a straight line. What did
Right.
recovery look like for you, as much as you want to share, of course?
Yeah, sure. Well, I walked into the rooms of 12 Step on April 8th, 2007. And that is for people, again, who don't know, the most popular, the most well known 12 Step is AA. But there are others, right? And so I walked in the rooms, and what's interesting? When I sat down in the rooms uh, the very first time of 12 Step, and I was crying, and I was just smelly, and I'm sitting in this uncomfortable hunk of plastic. I wasn't thinking about whether I was an alcoholic. You know what I was on my mind? That if sitting here will allow me for the first time in my life, and now I'm in my 40s, the first time in my life to wake up, walk to my mirror in my bathroom, birthday suit naked, look at myself in the mirror and love myself without drugs or alcohol, I'll sit in this chair.
Hmm.
That's what I wanted more than anything. And obviously, sobriety was an integral part of that, right? But yeah, that is how it started, and I'm going on 18 years of continuous sobriety and
Wow.
recovery. And Mark and Jeff, Mark has been incredibly supportive. I mean, the books I've written, and always supportive of my journey. And I remember specifically when I walked into the rooms for the first time. I walked out because I had told Mark, I had texted Mark at that time, and I said I relapsed. Right, as you said, it's not a straight line.
Yeah.
I relapsed. All he said was, "What are you going to do about it?" That's
Mm.
it. What are you going to do about it? Because they knew, now they know, they had figured out at this point that there's nothing they can do that is going to get me to do what I need to do. I have to want it. Right. And I
Yeah.
said, I'm going to 12 step. And he said, that's good. That's it. That's all he said. What else was there to say?
Right.
And
Absolutely.
obviously, I texted my brothers because yes, Mark's approval and my brother's approval is important to me.
Yeah.
Uh, we love each other dearly, and that is important to me.
That's amazing. So, how did you find writing? You are the author of a few books, and you have a new book called The Body Brokers. Congrats on the release,
Thank
by the
you.
way. So, tell me about your love for writing.
Well, it started. Again, as we talked about, I've always been kind of that empath kind of person, right? Where you cry and this and that, and writing. I was terrible at math, and writing just always seemed natural to me.
Mm.
And it all started back in the whole journey of the book writing started back in 2013 when I wrote my first, and it was a self-published book, terribly written, but it was more of a cathartic journey, as recovery memories often are. My first recovery memoir, Shattered Image, was a cathartic journey in releasing a lot of pain over my childhood, and it is probably the rawest, most just unfiltered, unflinching look at my childhood that there is. And I wrote that as really to help me. Uh, and then I transitioned into, as a lawyer, I struggled so mightily with addiction. And in sobriety, I looked back at my profession and realized that there was really nothing out there that talked about a profession that struggles with addiction, alcohol addiction, at a rate over twice the general public. We know that for a fact. And for female lawyers, it gets up to a third, 30%. And it can be as high as 40% now for female lawyers. So we are a profession, for many reasons, that struggles with alcohol addiction. And so I wrote The Addicted Lawyer. But how many times can you tell your own story, right? I'm always trying to write and always, my mind's always going, always going. So that transitioned into The Ambulance Chaser, which is about a Pittsburgh lawyer who's accused of the murder of a childhood classmate 30 years after it happened, disrupting his life and having to find the true killer. And then the Body Brokers is more. I'm very active in the fentanyl awareness space, right? Especially combat. There's a lot of misinformation about fentanyl. People think that if you're near it, you can die. If you touch it, you can die. None of this is true. None of this is true. And so I wanted to address those things in an engaging fictional way, right? Where people can both be entertained and understand the real science of fentanyl. And to give you an example, and some of your listeners may say, Brian, you're full of it. Well, go look this up. There are tons of articles. You see stories all the time where law enforcement will say, one of our police officers overdosed because he touched fentanyl or inhaled it, right? And you see the story. It gets on Twitter and gets around the world 100 times. But the science tells that is impossible. That is physically impossible. The only ways to overdose on fentanyl, and this is illicit fentanyl. We're not talking about the patch. Those are two separate things. We're talking about, you arrest someone and he has a bag. They have a baggie, right? Mm-hmm. Here is how you overdose or get the therapeutic high on fentanyl. You have to ingest it. That is by snorting, injecting. It can be smoked, but not laced in marijuana. It has to be smoked over aluminum foil. That marijuana crap is nonsense too. And it can be in a pill, laced in a pill, right? Where we see that tragically, we see this all the time with high school kids and such, think they're getting Percocet and it's fentanyl and they die. That is a real problem. So, snorting, putting it in your mouth, we see this with infants, right? Where infants die and the parents are charged with negligent homicide. The infants aren't dying because they're around it. They died because they touched it and put it in their mouth. And so you have to actually ingest it. And these are the only scientifically proven ways to get a therapeutic high or fatally overdose on fentanyl. The patch, moving over to the patch, Big Pharma spent millions of dollars to develop a way to deliver fentanyl over a dose 12-hour period, right? And so through an alcohol-based solution. That is why the patch that penetrates the skin. That is why, but that is over a 12-hour period. If you touch the patch, you're not going to overdose either. And so people get and I understand because the narrative is like it's a weapon of mass destruction.
Right.
You see the stories. There's enough here to kill billions. Well, billions would have to actually ingest it, right? It could kill 300 million. Well, that would be killing off the entire U.S. population, and they'd actually have to ingest it. So
yeah.
Does that make sense?
Totally. And so the Body Brokers is a way for you to make education about it more palatable and a more
and the Body Brokers is about a disgraced lawyer who finds his girlfriend dead of a fentanyl overdose, and he and her toxicologist roommate go on a mission to prove that the girl was actually murdered.
Oh wow.
But I use it as a vehicle to also combat some stereotypes.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Congratulations on the book release. I think that's absolutely amazing.
I'll tell you, when you release a book, it doesn't help having a brother with millions of followers, right? Who loves you. Yeah. Tweet, right? Mark, can you tweet? So thank you, Mark. That helps. Thank you, Mark.
Good for you. Does he run his own social media? Because I know for my brother, he's like, on Twitter.
To my knowledge, Mark runs his own, to my knowledge, and I would be shocked if it was. No. I think I can confidently say Mark runs his own social media.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. I think what's next for you, right? I mean, you have so many lanes where you could go down. What are you interested in?
I still do. I kind of make my living now doing public speaking. I speak at recovery conferences and law firms all over the country and in Canada. I'll probably write another book. I have some thoughts on it, but it's just you write one and then it's I compare it to, I've run 8 marathons, and I compare it to way a long time ago. Now I have an artificial hip, but I compare it to after I finish a marathon, you say you're never going to run another one, right? And after you write a book, no, not another one. But that will pass, and I have some ideas, and I assume I will write another book. And that, my life is very quiet, very quiet. Both our parents are gone now, but I look forward to seeing my brothers and my nieces and nephews, my wife, and that's the great thing about recovery is there is zero drama in my life,
Wow. And that's beautiful.
and that's the way I
Peaceful.
like it. Yes,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we wrap up, one final question for you. Thank you so much for sharing everything. It's been just a very healing experience for me to hear this as well. What is your hope for your impact on this world? If you could leave the planet with one message, what would it be?
it would be that we all have the ability to change our little corner with acts of kindness for social good. And that's what I try to do. It comes from a saying called tikkun olam, change the worlds with acts of kindness for social good. We all
Wow.
have the ability. We all have the ability to do that in our own way. And it does, whatever you do doesn't have to change the world. Just, get out there and, create the social good for your little corner, however
Yeah.
you define that.
That's beautiful. And
That's
I
what I
think
try
the
to do.
same goes for identity, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to do some huge thing. Start small. Start with
Yeah, and
yourself.
and be yourself, right? What that's I mean, that's one of my valuable lessons from trying to be Mark. And be I can't. And I get asked this too. We can finish with this. I'm okay not being a billionaire, right? That's not who I am. Uh, we're just so different people. I've never strived for that. I've never strived for I mean tech. I thought Bitcoin was mined in a mountain until not long ago, right? I mean, that's just not who I am. And be yourself. That's okay. Be yourself. You know. Be who you are, not who you think you want to be. Based on
Mm.
what someone else has accomplished. That never works out. It never works out. And I won't name names, but I see this all the time with siblings of famous people, right? Especially when they're younger. And I get it. You learn when I was younger that getting in trouble, doing this, doing that, and it's all based on name fame.
Name fame. That you need to trademark. I honestly, Ryan, I feel like these are all lessons I wish I knew in middle school. I mean,
Yeah,
I was in high school when the Warriors and the Cavs had their little stint for however 4 or 5 years, and that was like chaos for me. I was like, man, I want to post. I'm so happy for my brother, but then I get like weird comments from people at school. So then, should I claim it? Should I distance myself from it? It was just
yeah.
like a constant
And
whirlwind.
and make no mistake, I get a lot of that too online. I'm very active online, very active. Not so much on Twitter and more on Blue Sky now, but
Mm.
especially during the election, right? I mean, Mark and I made no secrets of who we supported, and especially Mark. I mean, I don't have a huge megaphone, but especially Mark. And I'm telling you, I got nasty. Yeah, you should. I mean, I won't even repeat some of the stuff said to me in emails. Called my mother the W word, and it's and on Twitter and this and that. And one thing I have learned, right, that has nothing to do with me.
Mm.
What people, this is something I learned in 12. So what people think of me is none of my business unless it's my family.
Wow. I like that. I really like that caveat. That's something I'm learning right now as I
Yeah,
continue to put myself out there. It's not my business. I can
not
just
my
show up how
business.
I
And
am.
don't know those people. What they're saying about me has nothing to do with me. It's about their own insecurities and struggles and whatever their problems they're having in their lives. I can't get worked up, or I'd relapse. I won't say that, but I'd be a mess if I got worked up
Yeah.
every time someone came at me because of something Mark said, or did, because of his support in the election. I mean, it was daily. It was daily.
Wow. Wow. Well, I can certainly relate, and
Yeah.
I'm just so happy that you came here and shared your perspective, Ryan. You are absolutely incredible. Like
Thank you so
absolutely
much.
incredible.
I can't tell you how honored I was that you allowed me to come on.
Oh, I was so honored that you reached out. Seriously. I mean, I actually was just in Dallas for the last Warriors Mavs game. And so I'll have to let you know when I come back. We can run a part two in person.
Absolutely, come back during a game, the next game, and we'll go. I don't
I
go to
will.
that many games anymore. I don't go to that many games anymore. It's become so easy, right? You get older, you go to a game. I used to go all the time. But you go to a game and it starts at 7:30 Central Time. By the time it ends, you get home. It's 10:30. By the time you wind down, it's 11. yeah, and then you get to sleep at midnight. I might as well be all night doing blow, be out all night doing blow.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, you'll have to come when the doves roll through. But
Sounds
so
good.
great to meet you. Thank you, Ryan, and thank
Thank
you to all
you.
of you for watching. Cheers to you. I don't think there's a better example of the power that comes from sharing your story. There's so much there. I mean, I'm definitely going to go back and watch this a few times, taking notes. I feel like he just does such a beautiful job of relaying a message of hope and inspiration and beauty, but not from a place of, hey, I have it all figured out, but from a place of, hey, like I was right there with you. And so I think his story transcends, the themes that we talked about. It's a human story. It's a beautiful, powerful human story. If you want to support Ryan, I will link his socials. Make sure to go pick up his new book. I will link it in the caption below. But I mean, wow, what an inspiring person. I'm so grateful he was here. Make sure you subscribe, like, comment, share with a friend if you enjoyed it. And we will see you back here in just a short couple weeks. Ooh, I'm excited. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you feel loved and seen and valued and inspired. God loves you. God sees you. Cheers to you. Mwah. Bye, y'all.